Hello, I'm Stephen Hawke. I'm one of the contract managers for the Legal Aid Agency. I work in the Cardiff Legal Aid office, if the accent hadn't given that away already. And this next section, I will run through a bit of background around what we as contract managers do, how we work, and the kind of interactions we will have with your firm. So your contract manager will be your main point of contact for your legal aid contract. Hopefully your contract manager has already been in touch with you, but if not, then they will be getting in touch very, very soon just to introduce themselves and give you details. But just to explain a bit of the background as to how contract managers work. So there's two elements of the contract manager's role. The first one is to ensure contract compliance across everyone's legal aid contract. So that's basically just to make sure that legal aid work is being done correctly, and that basically the contract is being adhered to. And that's just to make sure, obviously, given that legal aid is public money, of course, that's being dealt with and spent correctly. And the second element of the role is to provide guidance and assistance to firms during the lifetime of the contract. So it's a supportive role as well as a compliance one, and we'll provide a bit more detail as to how that works throughout the rest of this presentation. But just by way of background around sort of how we work as a wider team, there's around about 100 contract managers across England and Wales. We're based in the regional legal aid offices, and there's one of those in most of the big cities, as you'd imagine. And so each contract manager will manage a portfolio of firms of around about 30 to 40 firms, and that's pretty much usually based on geographical areas. So each contract manager will manage a particular geographical patch, and then all of the legal aid contracted firms within that patch. And so there can be a bit of variety amongst that. For example, one contract manager might manage all contracts within a big city. Others may manage a more rural area. So you've got that kind of difference. And also, a portfolio will include legal aid contracts that aren't criminal contracts. So it's all the different civil categories of law that legal aid is available for, such as family, immigration, mental health, housing, etc. So within those sort of 30 to 40 firms, there can be quite a difference in terms of the types of work that the firm will carry out, the size of the firm, of course, and obviously where that firm is based. But the reason we do it this geographically is that way we can hopefully pick up some more of an understanding as to any particular issues affecting an area, whether there's particular issues with a court or a police station, for example. So hopefully that helps us in our job, and in turn then we can use that to help yourself. One of the other things a contract manager will do is sort of partake or be involved in other stakeholder areas, not just managing firms directly. So, for example, in the crime sphere, where there's a criminal justice bureau in that area, a contract manager will usually sit on that, court user groups, and there's obviously civil equivalents, but in terms of crime, those would be the main areas. And hopefully by attending those, we can pick up some information on what's happening on a wider basis across crime, and then obviously anything useful, we can feed that back to firms as a kind of link point, which hopefully helps us and then in turn helps yourselves. Our portfolios normally change every 3 years, so I think there'll be a change around about that mark where, as contract managers, we will effectively have a reshuffle, and that means we'll obviously then start relationships afresh with firms, and change areas, and obviously that'll just be a new name and a new face to get used to. But yeah, so that should be every 3 years, so quite a while away from now, but it's something just to know how we work. And I think then in terms of what contract managers do with your firms, like I said, there's two main elements to the role we've covered. But on the day-to-day basis, is that your contract manager will normally be the first port of call, and the dealings we have will normally be with your nominated contract liaison manager, I think it's called under the contract. So each firm will have a nominated point of contact as well, and so lots of the dealings will be between us and them. And in terms of how we do that, that can vary, obviously, depending on what you as a firm prefer. So whether that's picking up the phone and having discussions or raising queries that way, or some firms obviously prefer to do things by email, which is fine. And obviously that way we will correspond via email and ideally help, answer any question that we can, or if we can't, then if it's a case of signposting, then obviously we'll do that. So yeah, we're happy to work with whichever approach suits you as a firm, but yeah, we are generally contactable by any method, and any sort of any day, any time. So feel free to raise any such queries you have. Sometimes the more technical queries will need to go to the dedicated teams. So for example, if it's a specific duty query, then it may be the rota team you'll need. But if you're not sure, then yeah, get in touch with your contract manager as a first resort. And then if we need to signpost you on, then we will do that and hopefully help. There will also be face-to-face meetings that you have with your contract manager from time to time. Usually that will be on an annual basis, or more often if either you've asked for that or if there's other things to cover. But we'll come on to that in a bit more detail as to what the annual reviews look like shortly. In terms of the kind of approach that we take, obviously we hope that we'll be professional and polite and courteous to you as firms. Really, we hope that's returned from you as well. So we hope we have a friendly and constructive relationship during the lifetime of the contract. But that's something we just wanted to point out, that obviously things shouldn't go wrong and there shouldn't be hopefully any negative experiences. So yeah, if we go into then the details of around what the annual reviews would look like, just to give you an understanding as to how that would look. But before we do that, I think because this webinar is mainly tailored towards new entrants or new providers, so people who are new to the crime contract, it's probably likely that your first interaction with your contract manager will be for them to undertake what we would call a contract tender verification visit. It was a bit of a mouthful. So I think that's one that we will, we as contract managers have to complete within the first 3 months of the start of the contract. So between now and Christmas. And what that visit will entail is the contract manager usually coming out to visit you, or if not, then picking that up via either by email possibly, or a virtual meeting if that suits. But yeah, the aim of that meeting will be to double check all the details that you tendered for to get the contract are in place. So it will be covering if yours is a new office, it'll be checking that the new office complies. It's double checking that the personnel that you've said you'd have in place as part of the tender are in place. Your duty solicitors, your supervisors, etc. So it's just double checking at the start of the contract that everything is in place that you tendered for. So as I said, if your contract manager hasn't already been in touch, then I can imagine they will be very shortly, just to arrange that visit. It'll be a visit booked in by agreement, so obviously we agree a date beforehand, and then obviously the contract manager will come along and double check things, make sure things are in place, and if not, then obviously there'll be a discussion just to explain if anything needs to be addressed, or if there are any issues in terms of things that aren't in place that should be, then obviously that will be picked up by your contract manager on the day. So that should be the first interaction you have. Once that's done and out the way, and we move more into a business as usual, the main face-to-face interaction will be the annual review. The details of what would be included within that annual review are in slide 10 for those going through the slide pack. The annual reviews are, as the name suggests, done once a year. That'll be something that the contract manager will book in with notice and in advance. So your contract manager should normally be in discussions to agree a date with you. There normally will be a sort of an informal agenda sent across just to set out the kind of issues that will be covered, and sometimes information that will be needed. So it'll basically be a check, a bit like an annual MOT. So it's making sure that in terms of contract compliance, that the things that need to be in place are still in place. So at the annual review, it will look at some very basic information to do with your business, such as whether your accreditation, so your SQM or your Lexel accreditation's in place. Just checking a copy of your indemnity insurance, your family tree, just to get an idea of who's doing the contract work, and then obviously what the lines of supervision are. And then moving into the more detailed stuff. So for the individual compliance, it'll be checking that each duty solicitor remains eligible to be on the rota, and any supervisor you've got supervising your legal aid work remain qualified as a supervisor. Both of those, I think, will be covered in a bit more detail later in this presentation. And then I think then it's looking at other general issues such as your sort of performance for the last 12 months. So I think there'll be various key performance indicators that again we'll come on to in a bit more detail shortly. So it'll be a discussion through any of those, and if there are any issues, then obviously a contract manager will flag those. Normally they shouldn't be a surprise; they should have been flagged in advance, but it'll just be a chance for us to discuss, if there's anything that looks as if they may be, for example, training needs. Or do something in terms of incorrect data being submitted, then obviously your contract manager can have a discussion through just to run through anything that looks a little bit out of kilter, and if anything we can do to try and assist to try and address those issues. But the largest sort of proportion of the work for the annual review is to be looking at a small sample of files that have been submitted, and we'll cover that in a bit more detail in the following slides.
Hello, my name's Joanna Howell and I'm a contract manager in the West Midlands. We cover the Birmingham, Stoke, West Mercia region. So I'm going to talk you through now the file review process, potential outcomes from the annual review, and also the KPIs. So in addition to checking your business staff and contractual requirements, your contract manager will also look at a sample of closed files from the previous 12 months. Now, for new providers, your first annual review might not be 12 months after you started, so there might not be 12 months worth of claims for them to look at. So it might be a smaller sample, but generally we will be looking at the previous 12 months once we get into a kind of rolling annual review process. So the sample will be taken from your crime lower cases. So those are the ones that you report through CWA. So that's your police station claims, court duty claims, and your magistrates courts claims. Contract managers don't look at Crown Court claims as part of the file review process. There aren't a set number of files that your contract manager will look at. It'll depend on a number of different factors, the size of the firm, the number of claims that you put through, the number of offices, contracted offices that you have, and also any kind of outliers or unusual claims that they see when they're going through the data. Where firms have multiple offices, we will look at files from each office. Now, the sample isn't random. When making a file selection, the contract manager is looking for anomalies or outliers, like I say. So we're looking for high disbursement claims, for example, duplicate claims, zero profit costs on police station claims. So how many of these issues are identified can also affect the size of the sample. We'll also pick some general files to check that they've been correctly claimed. For example, we might pick some magistrates court claims, say category 2 claims, to have a look and check that where there's been a crack trial or discontinued late into the proceedings, that there is evidence of trial preparation on the file. Now, your contract manager might request that the files are uploaded into the secure file exchange and review them before they visit, or they might ask that they are provided on the day and look at them while they're at your office. They will talk to you in advance about which of these processes they're going to follow, and if you've got any concerns, talk to your contract manager. If they are being uploaded to secure file exchange, your contract manager might ask for a sort of slimmed down file. For example, they may not want you to upload the custody record on a police station claim or all of the disclosure on a Mags Court claim. So like I say, just speak to your contract manager if you've got any concerns. And lastly, your contract manager might look at a sample of open files on the day. Now, file review isn't a mechanism designed to recoup monies from firms. It's a vehicle for ensuring accurate claiming. And there will often be occasions where we identify underclaims as well as overclaims. And in those instances, we will amend them so that the firm is paid the correct amount. If issues are identified on the files, you may be asked to self-review any other claims from that same period which fit the profile of the non-compliant files. The contract manager may also issue a contract notice. Now, the purpose of the contract notice is to flag the fact that non-compliances have been identified, and it triggers a mechanism for improving accuracy. That would involve discussing any areas where extra controls or revised checklists might be needed, and then conducting a further file review within 6 months of issuing the notice. It's essentially a risk management process designed to increase the accuracy of the claims. Contract notices will only become an issue if a contract manager notices that there are continually repeated breaches. And these would be around the same issue. So, for example, if there's been a breach of duplicate claims, for example, at the annual review, and then at the contract notice review, there's found that there's still duplicates, and then potentially at the next annual review, there's still duplicates. Each of those would have had a contract notice, and there will become a point where the contract manager will say, well, why are these continually happening? And that may result in a sanction. However, you will have had plenty of discussions with your contract manager before you reach that point. If during the file review process you have any queries or are not clear on anything, speak to your contract manager. And also if there's any deadlines for responses and further information and you're struggling to meet those, again, speak to your contract manager. Don't just ignore the deadline because there is flexibility on dates and etc. And lastly, I'm just going to talk through the 4 KPIs that your contract manager will monitor. You'll find these in paragraph 2.59 of the CRAN specification. So the first one is to avoid reduction of more than 15% of your escape and non-standard fee claims. Where reductions are made, it's important that you monitor those and address the reasons. To accept at least 90% of calls from the DSCC, the 90% target allows for conflicts and situations where you'll be unable to take a call. Virtual court acceptance. Now, there are only 11 virtual courts nationally, so for most people, this won't be relevant. But for those providers who have a virtual court, there is a KPI that you must accept 90% of calls to attend. And lastly, to ensure that 95% or more of cases conclude before the case is transferred to another provider. Where more than 5% of clients are transferring, then this may be an indicator that there's an issue. Information is pulled from your CWA submission, so the outcome codes is what gives us information. And a failure to meet a KPI will trigger discussion with your contract manager on the reasons, and it's not necessarily the case that we would take action straight away. It is just a trigger of a conversation. Those percentages are able to sort of highlight that there may be an issue, but like I say, there'll be a discussion around that.
Hi everyone. This next section will pick up from the KPIs discussed just now, and it will cover the provider activity report, which is something that we've introduced relatively recently, and it's information to be sent out to firms on an automated basis. So you should get it every quarter from one of our standard email addresses. The provider activity report will include details such as your key performance indicators and a bit of extra information, and it'll just give you a bit of a flavour as to how your firm has performed on a legal aid basis across the last quarter, and hopefully give you a bit of detail and a bit of data that will help you to sort of manage the contract and to see how it's going. the report should be sent to the main contact within a firm, and it's one of the things I think that you would have been added to the list automatically when the contract started. So you should have the first one of those within the first quarter. But if you haven't, then by all means do flag with your contract manager. So the provider activity report just contains a kind of a dashboard in terms of from the claims data and the other information that you would have provided to us via your sort of reporting and your submissions. Then obviously we'll give a bit of an idea from that as to how that looks. So it'll include some very basic details such as your legal aid fund take during that period. So you can see obviously from a claiming point of view how much money you've been paid from the legal aid. And also then on a monthly basis, your sort of contract payment reconciliation position. So it'll just show you whether there's any potential debit on your account, and obviously if so, how much that is. So just a good bit of financial information for you as a firm. It'll also include, like I said, some of the KPI data. So it'll include performance around your duty solicitor acceptance, which we've already covered. It'll also include some sort of performance data that isn't necessarily a contractual KPI, but nevertheless may be useful. So for example, within your magistrates court reporting, it'll give a breakdown as to the types of standard fees that includes. So magistrates court work, as you may already know, is split between a lower standard fee, a higher standard fee, and a non-standard fee. So that report will give a breakdown in terms of percentages around that sort of standard fee claiming pattern. Just again for your information, just so you can see it. One other sort of maybe useful bit of data within that is your rejection rate for any e-forms that you've submitted as a firm. So again, hopefully that will give you a good bit of understanding as to how your firm is performing on that element. So e-forms will be where you've submitted an application for legal aid for a representation order. And if for some reason those are being rejected because the form isn't complete, then obviously that would count as a reject. And just to note, that's different to a refusal. An e-form might be refused on the basis of the client not being eligible or the IOJ test, interest to justice test, not being met. So refusals aren't measured by us in terms of performance. The rejects are more where the form just hasn't been completed correctly, or there's a box missing, for example. So we send out a bit of data looking at the reject level, which hopefully again as a firm will be helpful. Obviously you and us want to be able to process applications on a first time basis. So if for some reason your e-forms rejection rate does look a bit higher than it should be, then your contract manager, again, as we've already mentioned, will be in touch. And if there's something we can do by way of training or any online sort of learning resources that might assist, then obviously we can flag that. It will also include your peer review score and other sort of general performance, and peer review again is something we'll come on to a bit later on. But yeah, so it's just to understand that provider activity report or PAR report should give you some useful information. It also goes to your contract manager so that we can see it. So if there is something that does look a bit sort of out of kilter or something that needs looking at or could do with being improved, then that should be a conversation that starts then between yourselves and the contract manager around, how we can help to address that or what needs to be done. And maybe it's just important to sort of stress in terms of that outside of the contractual KPIs, if there is something that does look a bit different, it may be just sort of out of profile, but that isn't the same as being non-compliant with the contract. So I think that might be something that we say that one particular measure does look a bit different to what we would normally see, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It just means that we need to understand what may be sort of causing that, and it may be completely fine. So as I said, it's just more to have a discussion with your contract manager just so we can understand and be happy that things are all on track. Moving on then in the slide pack to slide 15, and what we thought might be useful is to go through some common errors that we see on file reviews. So I think as we've covered previously, those file reviews will happen on a yearly basis, sometimes more often. I mean, if you're a newer firm, for example, or there might be some other trigger that might mean we do a file review a bit more often. But I think given the importance of that area of work, it may be worth running through just very quickly some common errors. So I think that is set out on slide 15. So I think it may be worth, without getting into too much detail, just running through a couple of sort of headlines in terms of things that we see in terms of claiming errors more commonly. So the first one at the top is travel and disbursement claiming, and that can be across all kinds of claims. So whether it's police station or magistrates court or even Crown Court work. And I think that's, I mean, without wishing to point out the obvious, I mean, it's just to make sure that on a file, that if you claimed for travel to a police station or maybe to a prison or to the court, that travel is correct. And that would normally need to be, if it's within office hours, from your office to the location. So it's just to make sure that's right. One error we commonly see is where an agent has been used on a police station matter, and what the agent will commonly do is claim from their home address to the location of travel, which is fine in terms of how they report and get paid via you as a firm. But then the one thing to bear in mind is where that translates into a legal aid claim. If it's within office hours, then that travel would need to be from your office address and not from the agent's home address. Outside of office hours, of course, that's fine. Obviously, travel can be from home address then, but it's just to be wary of whether travel is claimed during office hours, that it's claimed from the office, and unless there's a particular exception and justification for that. So that's just something just to watch out for. Court duty claiming, that's maybe a slightly higher risk than other types of crime claim, just because it's still paid under hourly rates. Most other areas of crime are, as you know, paid via fixed fee. Court duty claims aren't. They are paid per hour, and so I think because of that, we sometimes see that there's more capacity for something to go wrong if an incorrect hourly rate has been used, or if the time maybe hasn't been calculated correctly. So yeah, it's just to make sure that, just to be extra careful with the court duty claims, that the hourly rate used is correct, and obviously then the correct total amount has been calculated. There are a couple of areas mentioned on slide 15 around magistrates court, and some areas that we sometimes see going wrong, and that can be looking at the standard fee category. So there are 3 or 4 different types of magistrates court claim, depending on the outcome of the case. So if you guilty plea, there'll be a particular type of standard fee for a standard guilty plea. If something is a contested trial or a mixed plea, then obviously that can be a slightly higher fee. And if something then goes on to the Crown Court, then that's something else. So that's just making sure that, looking at the work that's been done at the magistrates court, then the appropriate fee is claimed for that. And on a similar basis, then it's looking at under the contract, there's 2 sets of fees depending on where the work has taken place. So it's a designated or an undesignated fee. Under the contract, again, as some of you may already be aware, a designated area is classified under the contract in the standard terms. It usually is the bigger cities. So a designated area will usually be your larger city boroughs or bigger cities across the country. And so where a case has taken place in a designated area, then you claim an appropriate fee, which is a designated fee. Whereas if the case has taken place in an undesignated area, there's obviously a different fee then to claim for those. So it's just be happy that you're aware of what counts as a designated area, especially, for example, if you're a firm not based in a big city, then you do a case in a big city that might be a designated area. There's a different fee to be claimed for that. If you are a firm that's based in a designated area already, that's a bit more straightforward, because automatically then all of your claims would be classed as designated fees. So that should make it slightly easier. But yeah, so it's just to be, I'd say as a starting point, just be aware of the classification of designated or undesignated under the contract. And again, any uncertainty, any queries, check with your contract manager, and they will know and should be able to help. Yeah, a couple of other areas. There are sort of less frequent claiming types, and I've mentioned in the contract there's a couple of claiming codes, but there are some areas of work, such as the early fee or the means test fee, that can be claimed that we don't see very often. So it's just maybe a plea from us that if you are using those particular claims, just double checking the claim rules to make sure that they are correct. And yeah, so I think at the end of that slide, it's just, as we've mentioned already, if there are any queries on a particular file, if it's a little bit weird and wonderful, I would say it's definitely a good idea to be checking that with your contract manager before submitting the claim, just to make sure that that it has been claimed with the right codes and claimed correctly. It is definitely better to be checking beforehand, before the claim is submitted, rather than submit the claim and then potentially have that cause your firm issues down the line if that file is called for a review. So yeah, so I think any queries or anything that looks a little bit unusual, or if you're uncertain, I'd say definitely flag with your contract manager. There is also a plethora of guidance around crime claiming, which would be really useful and does cover some of these common areas. There's a link on the slide to our training website, which does contain lots of resources, and we've also got a couple of slides on that and some links to some guidance later on towards the end of this presentation. So we'll come back to those later, but yeah, we thought it might be useful just to cover those common errors. So then moving on to the last slide in this section, yeah, in terms of the annual reviews, the file reviews will be one main area, but the other main area that we would look at is duty solicitor compliance. So we thought it's probably worth just spending a couple of minutes just running through that in a similar vein to the file reviews, just to sort of highlight the key things that we look at under that sort of category, and maybe a couple of areas to watch out for, or a couple of requests from us that should help. So for those who have had a previous crime contract, or previously worked under a crime legal aid contract, this may hopefully be sort of already second nature, but just by way of background to this, duty solicitor compliance, it is something that we introduced under the previous contract, the 2017 contract, and it was something that was introduced primarily by the request of the rep bodies, and designed to address the issue that we had then around ghost duty solicitors on certain schemes. So it involved us introducing a couple of requirements or sort of compliance levels for each duty solicitor under the contract. So those with the sort of background in legal aid crime work will no doubt remember that the 14 hours was one of the key requirements. So under the old contract, we asked firms or duty solicitors to be evidencing 14 hours crime work per week. So that was one of the key measures. It was done, so like I said, to address the issue of ghost duty solicitors, and to make sure for everybody else basically that there was a level playing field. And I think by and large it's done that. It's not to say that there aren't still ghost duty solicitors on some schemes, or just duty solicitors that aren't fully compliant. So the similar rules are now in the current contract, but with a slight tweak. So I think the 14 hours is gone, but it's been replaced now with a monthly measure. So that's now 50 hours contract or crime defence work per month. So that's one of the measures that each duty solicitor would have to hit. So yeah, so these are set out in the contract, and it's spelt out in slide 16, so you can see the individual contract references there. So again, a bit like with the file reviews, it would definitely be worth being aware of that section of the contract in particular. So it's section sort of 6.21 onwards, and there are various measures in terms of the number of cases and the types of work that need to be undertaken and evidenced by each duty solicitor in your firm. So this is largely sort of business as usual now, I think. So hopefully it isn't going to be too much of an issue. It's not a new area anymore. So hopefully most firms are okay to comply with that. The evidence inside is another key area, I suppose. So I think for us as contract managers, and this would be a plea, that what we would ask for is for firms to be able to evidence at any given time that each of their duty solicitors is compliant. So there's nothing in the contract that sets out how the compliance should be evidenced. So there's no set pro forma, for example, that we've used. So we leave it up to the firm really. So it's so you can evidence that compliance in whichever mechanism suits you best. So if you have a case management system that generates these reports, great. If you prefer to do manual, a spreadsheet, or even sort of handwritten sort of notes to show compliance, that's fine too. I said I think if we leave it up to firms in terms of how that's recorded, but I think as long as you're able to evidence that. So if we receive a query at any given time about one of your duty solicitors, then we would come to you just to raise that, and then we would hope that you're able to then give us evidence to show for that particular duty solicitor that they are compliant. So yeah, so that's something that I think that's a common area that we do look at reviews, and sometimes outside of annual reviews. So you definitely do, from a contractual side, need to make sure that you can evidence each of your duty solicitors is compliant. There are some exceptions, again, as you're probably aware, around that compliance level for duty solicitors. We've seen during the COVID lockdown, for example, that there were sort of contingency arrangements in place around that for obvious reasons. Those have now been lifted on the basis that work is slowly moving back to normal. But yeah, on a very general level, there can be things such as obviously holidays, illness, unfortunately. There can be parental leave, obviously maternity or paternity, if someone has obviously gone off with that. So I think for any of those reasons, if a duty solicitor is unable to show compliance for that particular spell of time, that is fine. And I think that's just a case of just being ensure that the compliance is noted, and any sort of blips are recorded in your evidence. But I think, yeah, so I think that's something, again, there's a link to some guidance that we'll show later on in the slide, but definitely a big area for us. Again, any queries around this, if you're not sure, or if it looks like a duty solicitor may be struggling to hit the numbers, flag that with your contract manager as soon as you become aware, just so obviously we can have that discussion. But that's something, again, in terms of contract compliance, that's a biggie for us, so something just to watch. And that's the end of this section. Okay, and then we now move on to just the tail end of the slide pack, and it's just a couple of slides giving a few links, as we mentioned earlier, a few links to guidance, a couple of maybe areas just to flag and signpost to you, which may hopefully assist in terms of claiming or just general guidance. So so we're on to slide 23. So maybe the first thing for us to signpost is that there's a legal aid training website. So this is different to our normal website, which is the gov.uk legal aid website. We've set up a separate website which is dedicated to training resources, really. So so the best thing I can probably do, if my team's skills allow, is to share a screenshot. So hopefully that's popped up. So this is a screenshot of our training website. If you can find it by using any search engine and searching for legal aid training, it should come up as the first result. And as you can see, there's lots of resources within this website, which is probably going to be more guidance than you'll ever need, but there should be an answer to most queries here. So it contains lots of different resources, from just links to guidance. Sometimes interactive training sessions can be set up. There can be referrals to different teams. So if I just click the different menus on the top of the page, just to give a quick flavour. So we've got the home page. There's what's new. So that you can see from the links there's changes to crime fees, crime rejects. Obviously, there are some civil links too. It's not just for crime, but in terms of crime area, because there have been quite a few changes at the start of this contract, you will find quite a bit of guidance around different elements of crime there. There is a crime link here, as you can see. So if I click on the crime training page specifically, then yeah, you can see just with the large squares, the different areas of crime training resources. Basically covers all elements of your crime legal aid contract. And yeah, so you can see there's plenty of links to different resources. There's also an online support link. So if your issue is more technical, there's a page there, as you can see, that links into our online support team and some more sort of technical support if you need that. And then there's a trainer-led page, which will be something set up, as you can see, coming soon. And that will be something that we've set up to include training modules such as this one, this webinar. And there'll be others set up on more specific areas of crime that will be uploaded soon. And so I think those will be something that you can dip into if needed. I know that sort of quite commonly we have modules on rejects of applications, for example, which we've covered as one of your KPIs, and I think there are sort of modules on that. So I think, yeah, the training website is definitely something just to keep in mind and then refer to if you are looking for guidance. So if I stop sharing that, there we go. Yeah, so that was the first thing to flag is the website. On slide 24, one of the things that we also need to flag, I think, that's maybe a bit less common for crime, is that you will probably need access to the civil CCMS system at some point during your legal aid contract. There are certain types of sort of quasi-civil criminal areas of work where you will need to apply for a civil legal aid certificate, and that's using the CCMS system. Yeah, we don't propose to go through that in any detail now because it would probably need a training session on its own, but it's just to understand that within that training website there are lots of resources around CCMS specifically, lots of quick guides to help you get set up onto the CCMS system, and lots of resources that may help on that particular side. One other thing to flag, I think, is the webinar recordings, as we mentioned. So I think they'll be on there. There'll be others set up in the coming months by our colleagues. So you should receive appointments or invitations to those in the same way as this particular event. So that's something to watch out for. But if you miss those, then a bit like this particular event, it will be recorded and added to our website. So if you wanted to catch up, then they should be saved on our training website. Just moving quickly on then, slide 25 is a useful one, especially useful because it has links to all the guidance and all the main places that you'll need. So the top link there is the actual contract itself, which obviously would be a definite in terms of something to have maybe printed off or saved as a favorite or whichever way works for you. But yeah, the contract and the specification to the contract in particular does set out all the detail about what you need to do under the contract, and any particular technical areas are covered there. So definitely beware of the contract. The remuneration regs are just underneath that, so that might be useful just to get a flavour of obviously the different fees. And then the third link down is another one that's probably equally as important to the contract. It's the Criminal Bills Assessment Manual. That kind of goes alongside the contract and is very useful in terms of your claiming. It gives a bit more detail to the contract in terms of particular areas of claim. So if there are any sort of grey areas, for example, sort of the travelling, for example, we've highlighted travel claiming as a potential issue on some claims. The Criminal Bills Assessment Manual does give a bit more detail around how travel should be claimed and just a bit more guidance around it. So that one is also very useful and one to keep at hand. There are other bits of guidance underneath, as you can see. So that this particular slide is useful to have those links. So yeah, I definitely want to stress that either it's worth printing those off or saving them somewhere, or just sharing them with colleagues, just to make sure that that everybody who needs to know is aware of those bits of guidance. I think by now you should also have had a welcome pack sent out by your contract manager, and I think the welcome pack you've had should include these similar links and a bit more detail around where to look for guidance. But hopefully, as this session has stressed, one of the key areas is to, if anything is in doubt or any queries you have, definitely go to your contract manager in the first instance. However, there are resources contained within these links that may give the answer to your question, especially if it's a more commonly asked query.